Toga! Toga! Hey, everyone. Welcome to You'll Probably Agree. And I have Jeff York on, and I think this might be one of his favorite comedies, from what I can tell. And we are talking about Animal House, and we're trying to determine, is it timeless and still funny, or is it outdated? We'll get into our thoughts of that. But Jeff, would you like to give us a quick synopsis of the movie and your thoughts of it?
Sure. Well, of course, I am once again at the fortunate position of having seen this when it originally came out. I was in high school and a very young and impressionable lad, I grant you, but it did exactly what I think it was supposed to do, and that is be very much anti-establishment, edgy, risque, politically incorrect, which is not a term back then, but it certainly is now, and anti-woke, which is not a term back then either, but it is certainly now. I know we'll get into how woke or not we should apply those sort of ideals to it, but it was really a hoot and a half, and kind of was, along with Saturday Night Live and to some degree Airplane a few years later, kind of the beginning of all this sort of really big, almost sort of adult version of Mad Magazine. You know, Mad Magazine was very edgy and very funny, well-liked, kind of across the board, though. I know a lot of kids who read it and some adults too, but this stuff started to get into edgier places. This movie was rated R. It had nudity. It had a lot of swearing. It was very counterculture. And the plot is, I think, saved a little bit on some of the, sort of questions about its delivery and what it's saying about society, because it's a period piece. It takes place in the fall of 1962 at a Western college, a fictional one called Faber, that sort of seems like it's maybe up in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. Yeah. And there we see two freshmen, Kent Dorfman and Larry Kroger, trying to make their way through the first year of college. And that means classes and tests and parties and girls and all kinds of things. And they end up trying to pledge a bunch of different fraternity houses. And the only one they can get into, because they're a little bit unconventional, not the typical sort of clean-cut American college students, Joe College, the way they're sort of perceived as the anti-that, at Delta House, which is considered the worst fraternity on campus. But they're a group of misfits, and they, of course, sort of are anti-authority about everything from the classes to the lunchroom to the parties, and shenanigans ensue. That's sort of there's not a ton of plot to it, except maybe that they're trying to stay off the dean's double secret probation, which would get their fraternity closed and them thrown out of college. But mostly it's very episodic, and it's sort of random in many, many respects. But it really struck a chord with audiences then. And like I said, sort of started this whole world of the Caddyshacks and all of those movie parodies and the sort of R-rated comedies that became very much in vogue. I mean, this begat Eddie Murphy and some of those kinds of movies and stories where there was a little more edge to it, a little more adult humor, albeit being still somewhat sophomoric.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I'm glad you actually mentioned that the movie doesn't have much of a story to it, because I think that was like the main thing I always noticed whenever I watched a movie, where I felt like, okay, I'm watching a series of sketches, but those sketches eventually lead up to a narrative, and the whole narrative is a fight the system, embrace your freedom kind of narrative, and you have a lot of
exactly
people,
right.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people kind of like rebelling against the college, You have, I mean, even their own professors are. You have Donald Sutherland, who plays a college professor who goes around and gets high and has sex with the students. And you can tell he doesn't care about that place. He's a lot like them. And that's his kind of little way of rebelling against it while also working within it. And then, of course, you have all the kids here who are up to all sorts of shenanigans. And Dean Warmer wants to, expel them, which I never got why he didn't just straight up expel them, but at the same time didn't do anything expellable like this.
Right.
I mean, the movie was, when I was doing my research, I guess it took place in 1962, and it took place in that setting because it was the last innocent year of America, and it even ends, with the parade. And should I put up spoilers? This movie's how old, you guys? Yeah,
It's plenty old. I don't think you have to, but unless you want to,
yeah, just in
but
case.
but
But
to
yeah, and
your
it ends with the parade with like a Jackie with like John Belushi getting in the car with a woman that it looks like he abducts, but doesn't really, which is like kind of an outdated, but I don't care. And yeah,
they're all
it
dressed
kind of
like
had a
Jackie, sort of
yeah.
in pillbox hat and the little Chanel suits and stuff. And you're
Yeah.
right. I mean, there's I think that parade is very important because twofold. One is it's very idealistic. They have the Kennedy float with the big head of Jack Kennedy and the first lady, which was everybody was excited about, the younger generation in the Kennedy administration. It also has sort of this idea of racial tolerance with the black hand and the white hand coming together. So it's sort of this idealistic setting for the explanation or the expression, I guess, of ideals in the youth in America. And yet I think what's funny about that is it is such a counter to that, in the sense that all of that youthful idealism less than a decade later would be turned into terrible things, as we find out from the sort of postscript about Where Are They Now, which was, of course, a spoof on the ending, the very famous ending of American Graffiti. But that ends with, some of these stalwart, idealized members of Faber College, like Niedermeyer, who's all gung-ho ROTC, and then he ends up getting killed by his own men in Vietnam. Or Greg Marmalard, who's the head of the student council and sort of the straight arrow, typical blonde-haired, blue-eyed, all-American Joe on campus, and he becomes a Nixon aide and then is raped in prison after Watergate. So it's saying, all this idealism at the beginning 60s, and by the 70s with Vietnam and Watergate and the corruption of the Nixon administration and all these kind of things, probably, without having to say it directly, but assassination and things like that. I mean, Kent Dorfman becomes a sensitivity trainer. So the whole idea of changing sort of masculine morals and mores in the world was reflected in his trajectory. All of this was really quite a reaction to that end of innocence, which they were right on the cusp of experiencing when Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas.
Yeah, and the movie sort of feels like a throwback to, and it isn't. It doesn't feel like it was a throwback to the good old days of college, where I kind of miss comedies that were politically incorrect like this. And is the movie outdated in some of the jokes? Yes. There is a joke in the film where I'm not gonna remember the actor's name, but he was the guy who I'm gonna pull it up. Larry Kroger. When Kroger is
Thomas Hulse.
Yeah, Thomas Hulse. Yeah. Oh, Hulse.
Amadeus.
Yeah, exactly. Mozart.
Wolfie.
However you
nice. Very good imitation.
Yeah. But like, there's that scene where he's with the girl.
Yes.
And she passes out. Yes. Her top comes off. Her breasts are exposed. And then he has the good devil, bad devil by the side. The bad devil goes, right. Fuck her. Go ahead. The good devil goes, for shame. Don't do that. Yeah. And of course, he has that moment where he's like, should I pull a Bill Cosby? And then he doesn't. But and then you find out later she was actually 13, and then piss off the mayor at the parade. Because he does the right thing. He delivers her home, albeit in a shocking.
Well, it's funny. There is for much politically incorrect or rude sort of moments like that, and there are plenty of them. I mean, when Stratton is in front of the student body and says, like, the question is not whether we took advantage of some of we did. Wink.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sexist. It's very racist in many respects. It's ageist, the number of things. But at the same time, versus the true scoundrels in the film, they aren't nearly as bad. And, they're I'm not saying their hearts are necessarily in the right place, but they're certainly not wholly in the wrong place. Like Wormer and Niedermeyer and some of those other people are, just being vicious and mean and cruel, beating up on the freshman plebes and discriminating against them at pledging and some other things. I mean, Dean Wormer is, the funny thing I'll say, Mike, and maybe this is lost on a little bit on the younger generation, but not like you, because you're very well read. But in 1978, we were only a couple years past Watergate, and Dean Wormer, in many respects, is almost treated like Nixon here.
Mm-hmm,
He's the guy who's in control, and he's got his special plumbers, if you will, his dirty tricksters that he to try to
Niedermeyer and all those guys to infiltrate them. Yeah,
because get Niedermeyer on it. He's a sneaky little shit like you. I mean, that's so like
even the way he speaks is kind of Nixon-esque.
Very so. John Furman had that great booming baritone and had often played villains. But the funny thing about him here is he doesn't play him that comedically. I mean, there's a few lines that he has that are funny, like "cut the shit" and some of those kind of things. Put a sock in it, boy. But mostly he's played just as a straight villain, and God love him for it because he's a pretty good villain. I think he's like when he walks into the Animal House, Delta House, and like just makes an unannounced visit, and he creeps in like he's almost some sort of evil ghost or something walking in through the door, like he's the boogeyman or something. Anyway, there were those kind of commentaries which were very obvious at the time, and maybe when you look at it now, you think, well, he's just a typical authority figure that they're sort of defying. Yes. But there was more to it, especially in that timing when, sort of the president of the United States could be a crook. Who's to say that the president of a college couldn't be, or any CEO or anybody who was in any kind of position of authority? And of course, the people who wrote this and were coming off of this sort of period of college were a lot of the people who turned into the counterculture, the hippies, the people like Abby Hoffman who said, don't trust anyone over 30. So there was that ethos amongst the writers, and even National Lampoon, which technically speaking, the title is National Lampoon's Animal House, was very much sort of like an adult or older mad magazine that was also should be mentioned in with the satire sort of pinnacles of Saturday Night Live and sort of Mad Magazine and some other things that were really starting to establish this as this kind of very, very prevalent new sort of take no prisoners comedy.
Yeah, and a lot of studios didn't want to touch it at the time because it was so raunchy and because it was so wrong. But it's like, if we didn't have Animal House, I don't think we would have South Park, and we wouldn't have most of the comedies we did today, because this was a movie that pushed the envelope, and it did so successfully. And yes, there will be a lot of people who will say, "Oh, this movie's outdated." Yes, it is, but we don't cancel or reject that, because we got to remember that this movie came out. What year did it come out? Actually?
78.
78. Okay, wow. Okay, so that's later than I thought. Like this was reflective of the times it was made in, and at those times. And let's be honest, when we're in college, a lot of us, we want to go out, we want to get laid. A lot of guys don't really see women as women. They saw them as sex objects, which is wrong. And it's wrong. This movie kind of displays them as that. But again, that's just kind of what college is like. It's not politically correct. It's you going out and doing all the crazy destructive things you want to do before you get older and have to grow up and, hold a real job and all that. So it's like it's nice to have had a raunchy comedy that really was kind of like the stepping stone to other raunchy comedies that try to emulate what or try to replicate what Animal House has done, but have failed. And some mildly successful. Like you have American Pie that's successful. You have
different things like that came definitely from this. Every generation kind of has their edgy teen comedy, I guess, if you will. I mean, even Rebel Without a Cause back in the 50s was, or some of the brand of things like The Wild One were sort of these edgier, Blackboard Jungle, even to some degree, those kind of things where there's a little bit of an edge to them. And even like the Frankie and Annette beach blanket comedies of the 60s were definitely like the establishment, your parents, they're a little square, they're not quite hip and happening. I mean, the one thing I'll say in defense of some of the sexism and racism here, I mean, yes, like Eric Stratton being a gynecologist is all about sex, and where they go to the girls' college to try to pick up the dates and play off of the fact that his girlfriend died, so he's going to get a pity fuck out of it, is terribly sexist. But they don't succeed in that, and
Mm.
they're taking down a few pegs. Stratton is taking even down a few more pegs when he's beaten up by Greggy and Dougie and a few of the other Hitler Youth, as he calls them. So it's not like these guys are necessarily completely winning all the time. I mean, even Blutarski, Bluto, he's more of a man child, and he's definitely gross and sort of acting out and stuff. But like when he's peeping on the girls taking their clothes off in the sorority house, he's overwhelmed by it that he falls backwards and crashes with the ladder
and
with
somehow
himself.
doesn't get injured.
Like
Toys 2 Story something.
It's just silly, but I mean, I'm just saying that it's not like they're so triumphant in it. I mean, they may prevail at the end, but at the same time, it's a qualified victory because, as we see from those whatever happened to them sort of bios, some are more successful than others. Even Boone and Katie, who come back together after being separated, and Boone has this great thing to go see Otis Day and the Knights, and they go to the Black Bar to see them. And I mean, that's where they also get into a little bit of like, how dumb are the silly white boys who think that they can rub shoulders with them just because the band played at their frat house party. But Boone and Katie get back together, but then they get divorced and then they get married again. And then, it's like they're not quite the winners that we all think they are. And even Bluto ending up as a senator, it may be a highfalutin position, but I'm not exactly sure that that's a compliment, knowing what we just came off of with the scandals of Watergate and some of those things.
Yeah, it's like a movie that kind of reminds you of what it's like to be a kid again, and
or a young adult who kind of had the last
they're kids now.
the last sort of grasp or gasp, if you will, of immaturity for having to get a job and be responsible for your rent and healthcare and different things like that you had to pay for and earn. So but it certainly struck a chord, because I mean, every college campus, every frat house still has toga parties, and they're still begetting the sort of edgier comedies. I mean, just like, The Hangover was one a generation ago. So we'll see what the next generation has. But these kind of edgy, the sort of slobs versus the knobs, or the, the elite, if you will, continues on. And, I think that's even screaming out for it now in this era of billionaires and the 1% and the tax cuts and all that. I mean, if this isn't crying out for more people to sort of be upstarts about it all, I don't know what is there. So maybe somebody will write that movie soon, and then that will become this generation's Animal House.
I think you made a great point earlier, and I was thinking the same thing when I'm watching this movie. I'm like, oh, this film does remind me of American Graffiti. When you think about, because A, it's about youth, and B,
it's in the 60s.
It's in the 60s, and it has a soundtrack that represents the 60s that has become kind of classic, from Louie Louie to You Make Me Want to Shout, where Otis Day, I can't remember his legal name, but he liked his appearance so much in that movie, he changed it to Otis Day.
Yeah, I mean, they became kind of a big deal here. It's interesting, too, the way it was written. I mean, it's the thing I like best about it, why I would say, Mike, if you don't mind me just throwing this in at this moment in our interview or our show we're doing together, that one of the reasons one of my favorite comedies is whether it's like, the Marx Brothers and Duck Soup. It's not only sort of counterculture and anti-establishment, but there's also an edge to it, and there's an intelligence to it. It may have some sort of dumb jokes, and even we talked about that when we talked about The Naked Gun and stuff, but there's an intelligence in the craftsmanship of it, and there needs to be, because I think like Adam Sandler's humor is going for the sort of low-hanging fruit, and it's just kind of silly straight up the middle, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for that kind of humor too, but this is very smart. I mean, the people who wrote it, Harold Ramis, Douglas Kenney, and Chris Miller, they were smart writers for Lampoon's Animal House, and obviously they had an edge to them, and even the way they kind of crafted is interesting. I don't know if you've read this online, but they sort of broke down the story, though, with the beats and the kind of things that they wanted it to do structure-wise, and then each of them wrote a scene. And then they pass that off to the next person to improve it. So in other words, they're saying like, okay, I'm in charge of writing the toga party scene. So I write that, and I throw in these jokes, and I think they're funny. Now I'm going to give it to Doug Kenney and see what he does. well, how does he plus it? And then he'll send it over to Chris Miller, and he'll plus it all the more. So, it was them trying to constantly top it and make it smarter and better, which I think is very admirable, because they could have just written, well, I think this is funny, and let's just throw this together with, 30% of it I wrote, 30% of it you wrote, and 30% of it the other guy wrote. But instead, they were really trying to help each other, sort of creative direct each other or edit each other and finesse it to make it as smart as they could. And it is smart. The fact that they're vamping on Watergate, the fact that they're showing that, even then sort of the idea of the military and some of these people we're handing power to were abusing it. There's graft with the mob run town, just so funny that this little place up in the Pacific Northwest has a mafioso, has kind of the control of the purse strings, and he's the mayor. It was sort of, I think setting up different kinds of, those people who once were considered to be out of sorts and on the fringes then become sort of more mainstream and maybe even more likable. And then, somebody like a Harold Ramis becomes a big director in Hollywood, John Landis as well. These people who at one time were on the outside, sort of coming in from a different point of view than the traditional studio system. So, I think all of that gives it an intelligence that is even there in some of the jokes that maybe, a little more base.
Yeah. Well, you look at something like Animal House or anything written by Ramis, because, Ramis wrote various classics, and the reason his movies are classics was because there were layers to his story.
Right.
For instance, when you look at Groundhog Day, it's really an existential film about
that's right,
the having to live every single day the same way through a certain routine, and how do you break that routine? Ghostbusters,
and how do you become your better self?
Yeah, exactly. Ghostbusters is about using science for the betterment of humanity. You got Caddyshack with some smart humor. But anyway, but you got Ramis, who gives you a smart script, and with this one with political undertones, and he also gives you a lot of memorable characters. Now, if there's one thing I will say I found as a flaw with this film, and this is the thing I mentioned before we rolled, where I think everyone's going to think I'm an idiot. I think a lot of the main characters look and sound exactly the same, and I had trouble differentiating who was who. And it wasn't because I haven't seen it in a long time. It's like I've seen it multiple times, and each time I'm like, wait, who's that guy? Who's that guy? Wait, that's the same white guy. It was like the same problem I had with the Pacific. I guess what I'm trying to say is all white people look the same.
Well, I think it's interesting because you've got certainly a feel to the narrative here. There's a banter and there's quick quips, and everybody's kind of a smart aleck. I mean, even Donald Sutherland, who has this distinct sort of Donald Sutherland, and he's kind of stoned and sleepy in it. But he's saying some pretty quippy things, and so everybody's kind of a jokester in it and stuff. I mean, I think in some respects, the sort of typical targets that you would say come off terrible here, and why it has not aged particularly well in these venues, is the only people of color that you really see are either the tokens that are sort of shoved aside as they're trying to pledge the fraternity houses in the beginning, or to stay in the nights, and the black men and women who are in the nightclub. And women, I mean, you've got three main female characters here. You've got Boone's girlfriend, Kate, played by
Karen Allen. Yeah,
that's right, Karen Allen, of course, who went on to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and she's adorable and down to earth, and yet she kind of cheats on her boyfriend. So she doesn't have a lot of screen time, but she comes off probably the best of, because the other two are sort of the sorority girls that are a little shallow, and one of them is Greg Marmalade's girlfriend, who doesn't like sex, doesn't like him much, and I don't think he likes anything, but she's kind of on the in crowd, so she's condescending, and that boy is a pig, and the other one is her best friend, who almost looks exactly like her, and yet she's a little bit more sympathetic, and ends up with I think she's the one who becomes the tourist at the Disneyland,
Universal Studios.
Which is hilarious. That's about as good as it's going to get for that girl. But so the three women here do not come off well, and there's nudity and sex involved with them. So, but at the same time, there's a lot of movies and stuff that's done today. I mean, Donald Trump gets up there and talks about the looks of his press secretary, as
Yeah.
opposed to what she's saying, like, oh, I can watch her and those eyes and the way she moves. It's like,
Or
Jesus
talks
Christ,
about
President
like
Trump.
banging his
This is,
daughter.
yeah. But I mean, even today, I mean, last week he was saying that about his press secretary. So, I'm not so sure that much has changed, but do we forgive it in a president? It seems many do, or they let it coax along and go along. But, here's a period piece that is, I think, commenting on that as well as exploiting it. So I'm not saying it's fair or necessarily eating its cake and having it too. But at the same time, I can forgive it some. And if you made that today, you wouldn't be able to get some of those jokes, and you'd have to be more sensitive. They'd probably do a little bit more well-rounded casting. But this was the time period, and in the 60s, the period they're showcasing here, that was a time period too that they're not being disloyal or misrepresentative of. But at the same time, there are some things that are cringy a little bit. And it's easy for me to sit here as a white man of privilege, who hasn't had to deal with some of these marginalizations, which is terrible. And I'm so angry and sad that so many of those people today still deal with that shit. But, at the same time, comedy is comedy. And for me, it's funny. It plays. It's making some smart ass commentary on this stuff. Again, I don't think it's always clearly like these people are always winning or superior. I think there's more nuance to it than that. The closest we get to sort of a traditional character, at least on our side, the side that the audience is asked to like, is probably the head of the fraternity, Hoover, played by Jamie Widows, who went on to become a very famous sitcom director. He decided to go behind the camera rather than stay in front of it. But he's kind of a classic nerd in a way here, which isn't too far off of what you'd see in Revenge of the Nerds, another movie that this influenced, and some of those kind of things. And he's his job is he ends up being the low-paid public DA, because he's trying to fight the good fight, and he's not going to be a big money bucks lawyer. So I think those kind of things keep it in check a little bit, or keep it a little more on the even keel, and I like that, because I think if they were all winners and had control of everything, it would seem false, because they weren't. They were definitely on the outside and the upstarts.
Yeah, well, it's like even American Graffiti, when they have like everyone's little title card at the end for where they went. It's like not everyone did an amazing job in life. They all just kind of fluctuated and went into different places, as is life. So there were two things I wanted to point out, maybe three. But one was that I didn't mind the offensive humor that's deemed racist now, because it wasn't like meant to be mean spirited or racist. It's really about it's about inclusivity, even if it isn't entirely communicated. Because when they go into the black nightclub, and they all look at him, and then I don't know which one of the white guys, but he said, I think it was the guy posing as Frank, who was trying to get
Otter.
Fawn Leibowitz. Otter. Yeah, who was trying to get into Fawn Leibowitz's roommate's pants, Shelley Davinsky. I had to write the name down. But when he said, when they all stop the music, they look at him and he goes, "We are all going to die." Otis Day keeps playing the music like, no, it's okay. These guys are great. But then they keep playing the joke where like all the black guys are like pulling knives out at him and scaring them.
Well, it's kind of funny too, because like the white guys are played for.
Yeah, they're kind of played for laughs.
They're kind of played for the fools here, because they don't understand it. Like, do you mind if we dance with your dates?
Yeah,
I think you should be leaving. We were just leaving. Finally they out and like their lives are in danger. But I think it's because they offended these people by coming into their thing, and who the hell do they think they are? And just because Otis Day played for them doesn't mean it crosses back over necessarily.
Reflective of the racism of the 70s too, and segregation.
And dare I say, whether it's Mel Brooks or Kentucky Fried Movie, which was John Landis, and even Airplane, it was becoming more and more okay to have some fun and make some fun of black culture. I mean, Flip Wilson was on television doing drag as Geraldine, this kind of streetwise, sassy black woman from the ghetto. And, you had Barbara Billingsley, Mrs. Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver, translating jive in Airplane. So, I mean, there were jokes that were pushing the envelope, and they were sometimes sexist, sometimes racist, making fun of gays or people from Asia and things like that. I mean, it's always been there, and to some degree, Ken Young or Jung, whatever his name was, jumping out of the back of the car or the trunk in the Hangover isn't that much different from Mickey Rooney doing a terrible stereotype in Breakfast at Tiffany's. You've just got the Asian guy, terrible.
That was outdated. Animal House,
the Asian guy doing the Asian jokes, which are funny. At least it's an Asian guy doing it. And I guess that's sort of a little bit the difference here. But comedy laughs at people, and if you're going to laugh at people, sometimes we laugh at types or ethnicities or class systems and things like that. But I'll tell you what, for every joke that you could look at this and say, boy, that's sexist. The women don't come off very well in here. Or, that's a little racist. The blacks all seem like thugs in that bar. I will turn around and say, but then you get lines like Dean Wormer, who lists off the grade points for Delta House. And, Mr. Blutarski is coming in dead last with 0.0. And then he says, and it's my favorite bit. Yeah, there you go. It is okay. I like when he goes like, "Congratulations, Kroger, you're at the top of the Delta Pledge class." And Bluto, hits Pinto's sort of like shoulder, like, "Hey, way to go, man!" And it's like it's not a great point, but all the other ones grading down the curve, he did the best, and that made Bluto proud of his plebe. But what I love is right after that when Dean Wormer says, "What I'm going to tell you now, I want you to pass down Mr. Stratton, Mr. Schoenstein. What's that? You're out. Finished at Faber, expelled. I want you off this campus by 9:00 Monday morning." And he takes a deep breath, and he takes his glasses off, and he goes, "And you'll be happy to know that I've notified your local draft boards and let them know that you are now all eligible for military service." He's sending these boys to their deaths in Vietnam to die in that stupid war. And the glee, he can barely contain his smile as he's doing these young men to a death sentence before they've even begun their lives. That is genius. And the fact that, you can make that in 78, knowing that the war was wrong. The young people protesting it stopped that war. They were right about it. It was right to go after Nixon. He was a crook. He said he wasn't, but he was. And, Woodward and Bernstein, through good reporting and, hitting the bricks and doing lots of legwork and interviewing people, got him out of there. And I love the fact that they're making that comment with this Nixonian villain. And he's just a vicious man who knows that Vietnam is just this endless revolving door of young men going in there to die because it's a useless war. It couldn't be won. We weren't really playing it to win. We were playing it to trump up the military industrial complex and all the money that could be made from making the helicopters and the weaponry and everything else there. And that to me counters any of the arguments about, it's so dated, it's so sexist, it's so politically incorrect. It's like, yes, all of that. It's kind of wonderful in its way. It didn't pull any punches, but you have to admit that for every dumb joke or sexist joke or bad joke, they had genius like that, where that's what the themes are. That's what's really going on here. These people who are supposed to be the creme de la creme of the leadership of the college are the assholes of the college. They're ruthless. I mean, they don't believe in anything that they put out there in that parade. The floats that they're starring in are not the feelings that they have demonstrated to us through the first, 90 minutes of this movie.
And there's a couple great points that I think you make there. It is very Nixonian, as you said, because these guys, he doesn't care if they die. So what he cares about is his own best interests.
Yes.
What's going to make my school look the best? What's going to make me look like a responsible leader? Oh, I know. I let these guys fuck around for like a year. So I'm going to not only expel them, but I'm going to have them serve their country which he knows they'll probably die. And of course, ironically, Niedermeyer gets killed by
his own men.
Yeah.
Like they've had it with him. So they
Yeah.
kill him. We got to get out of here. We can't have this guy being our lead anymore.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I just imagine, like, what if that was like Born on the 4th of July when Tom Cruise shoots his own guy, but instead of feeling horrible about it, he's like, oh, thank God I killed that asshole. And that was the scene. Like, I could just imagine that thing. And the other thing is, comedy is, I don't want to say meant to be offensive, but it's all the context in which you do it. You can make fun of anything as long as it's tasteful. And I don't think there was anything like really blatantly racist or distasteful. It was just funny observations, such as like in the beginning when our main characters are walking into, it might have been Delta House, I'm not sure, but they have, no, it wasn't Delta House, it was a competing one. And they see Muhammad sitting down and he has a turban and he's kind of weird and they don't want to talk to him. It's like, it's not saying this guy's actually weird. The joke is that these white guys don't know how to blend in with someone who dresses differently from them.
And they're no different from the people who've marginalized by putting them over here. Like, we don't want to fraternize with you at our party. You may come to us wanting to pledge us, but we don't want anything to do with you. So we're going to set you over here on this couch with the undesirables while we continue to talk to all the people, like the character that Kevin Bacon is playing, Chip, who is, considered to be, more of their speed, all-American white guy who's probably got proper parentage and country club background or whatever it is that, give him the advantage over these other people who are just different, and they're marginalized because they're different. They're not the status quo.
Yeah. And we have like a difference in comedy here where it's tasteful and it's not mean-spirited outside of, hating Nixon and all those guys, but that's actually a good thing to hate those guys. Where you also have this comedy culture these days where you have your Joe Rogans and your Theo Vaughns who they just want to be offensive and rude and punch down and just make fun of marginalized people because all they want to like bash on is woke culture. We hate woke, which South Park brilliantly made fun of recently, where Cartman is having an existential crisis because now all of a sudden hating woke culture isn't like a thing anymore. And
they're getting rid of the wokeness, so there's nothing to make fun of. And he can't survive without being able to listen to NPR and laugh at all these woke liberals who he thinks are just the most ridiculous people on the planet. That's the same kind of stuff here going in Animal House, Mike, that's working on a number of levels. And while it's crass and crude and it's Cartman, but what he's saying is actually a very intellectual joke at its core, just like some of the jokes here are, because even though we think it's crass and crude and, we have, Niedermeyer being dragged off by his horse after being hit by a golf ball, which is very slapsticky. Right up until then, it's so fun because Stratton and Boone are talking about, don't think of it as a game. Think of it as fun and all this kind of stuff. And, the stray golf balls go into, the cafeteria, and then that golf ball shows up later and Bluto is going through the line and he even eats the golf ball as part of his diet. And one hits perfectly on Dean Wormer's desk, smashing the glass pitcher of water, and water goes everywhere. But it's just, it's also very funny because Landis, in directing this, knew that that's funnier with the deadpan. Like John Vernon barely reacts to it. He doesn't even blanch it. It's just, and then he's like,
it's just
like Sideshow Bob almost. It's just all the kind of chicanery around him. But that's funny, and that plays as a more intellectual joke than just the slapstick of a golf ball breaking a pitcher of water. It works on those levels that South Park is working on, and I think a number of things are working on too. The thing I always remember about American Pie, now I grant you it was not my generation, I was a little bit older, is I thought the best part of that movie was the characterization that Eugene Levy played in his dad, trying so hard to relate to his kid. And that was when we had parents trying to be what they became as helicopter parents or more involved in their children's lives. And he's trying to help him. He goes out and gets him the porno mags and is trying to talk to him about what he's doing. And even, sort of makes up the excuse about what they will tell mom about the had sex with the pie and turned it into a mess. But that's a different level beyond just the, I'm wanting to get laid and it's going out to my friends and I'm a pathetic virgin. A lot of this sort of base comedy, going back to the Marx Brothers, going back to Charlie Chaplin, these kind of core slapsticky kind of everybody can relate to things. There's always something very intellectual underneath them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what
Systems,
separates Animal
you know,
House from something like Norbit or Happy Gilmore too. And here's the thing: I love my dumb comedies. I
yeah,
love Billy Madison. I love Happy Gilmore. I grew up on those movies. They're
yeah.
not the
There's,
smartest comedy, but there's a place for them.
yep,
But then there's also Animal House, which is dumb yet sophisticated. It kind of like mixes styles. For instance, when there's a whole scene where they take Niedermeyer's horse into the office and they load
yes,
the gun with blanks, and Flounder isn't even pointing at the horse. He's just pointing up with a blank and shoots it. And it's like the gun doesn't kill the horse. The whole joke is the horse gets so freaked out it
then he has
probably
a heart
has a
attack
heart
and
attack.
dies. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's like there's multiple levels to it, and it plays in a very cartoony way where all the guys go, wait a minute, you killed the horse. And of course, John Belushi keeps going, holy shit. And then, of course, they all go, whoa. And they
yeah,
were, but
right.
it's funny because you kind of know, okay, this is consciously a comedy, but at the same time, it plays it straight when you get to the Dean's character. So you have the goofballs with the straight characters, and we relate to the goofballs. And I will say, like, one flaw of the movie is the protagonist didn't stand out as much in the movie as the side characters did. Like, I remember the Dean more, and I remember John Belushi and D-Day, Bruce McGill more than I
Yeah,
do the main
he's terrific.
characters.
It's
Yeah,
funny too that Bruce McGill went on to become one of the most prolific character actors
yeah.
in
A lot of Michael
television and
Mann
movies.
movies.
Oh yeah, he's in all kinds of stuff. He's got
Yeah.
quite the resume. He's an excellent actor.
Yeah, I love him in The Insider when he just
Oh,
like
when
kills
he
off
gets
the
that
court.
1 2 minute scene in the courtroom, is like,
Yeah,
don't you laugh at that.
yeah.
This is a serious movie. He's so good in it. Yeah.
Wipe that
And he
smirk
was-
off your face.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he was in Reacher and some other great stuff as
Yeah.
well. But no, you're right. I mean, in some respects, the more eccentric I think the characters are, the better they are here because they are
Yeah.
so vivid and funny.
It makes it
and-
more
and-
heroic in a way.
Right. I also think, to your point, you just said a very good point, Mike, about the sort of slapsticky cartooniness countered by a straightness, which is what we also talked about with the Naked Gun. But to that very point, you've got not only the slapstick of these guys trying to get this big horse, sort of pulled up the stairs and into the college so they can go into the dorm and into the office of Dean Wormer, but then you've got even the sort of cartoony freeze frame on the horse going,
Oh
he
yeah.
has his heart attack, which is a brilliant edit by Landis and his editor. They made fun of that. But then the very next scene after that is you've got Wormer talking to the mayor about, this upstart fraternity and what they're going to do about it. And is it going to ruin the upcoming Founders Day party or parade and everything else? And they're having this very serious conversation. And yet in the background, just like they did a lot of funny background gags in The Naked Gun, you've got this, maintenance guy or janitorial guy from the college sitting there trying to figure out what he's going to do with this horse, which has now become, stiff with his legs up, like it's some sort of, bad prop from a Carol Burnett show or something. And he's measuring it and trying to figure out how he's going to get it out the door and all this stuff. Meanwhile, these two gentlemen of business are having this serious conversation. And then at the end gag is he pulls out a chainsaw, like he's going to have to cut it in half to get it through the door. Now, they don't show that any more than they show out with it. You just hear the sound effect of the vomit. But that's very clever understanding of comedy by John Landis and the writers, when to be serious, when to be funny, when to show something, when not to show something, when subtlety is funnier, when broad humor is funnier, or when the gag in the background is really what you're paying attention to, even though these two men in the foreground are talking about something which is important for the plot, but you're countering that with this very funny thing that's going on in the background that keeps stealing your eye.
Yeah, and the funniest thing is like we were saying with Naked Gun, it's layers to a joke.
Right,
It's not
right.
just like, oh, he gets kicked in the nuts and it's funny. It's
Right.
like, no, what if he gets kicked in the nuts, but then he has to walk a mile back home,
Right.
and then on the way on the mile back home, he gets a call from his girlfriend and she wants to go over there. Now he's got to go over there, and the whole time his nuts are hurting. Like, it's kind of like that. You build upon it and make it funnier. You don't just have one little punchline. And
Well, one great example of that in this movie, Mike, is Niedermeyer's pinched nerve. He's wearing the collar for a number of scenes
yeah,
after the horse drags him away, and so it continues to hurt. And even though he's having the freshman over to talk about his stories and experiences, he's wearing the neck collar. And at one point, they're in I think it's maybe the cafeteria or somewhere else, where Bluto walks by him and goes like the horse thing, and he goes like this, like his, he knows he's being made fun of, but it still hurts. And he tried to move his neck too fast. So they're playing off of, it's a running gag, his neck injury from the very first time. And yet I love the fact that they continue it. He's not better 3 scenes later. He's still wearing that neck brace in a number of scenes afterwards. And we're reminded that it hurts, and taking us back to the horse.
Yeah, well, we're getting Schadenfreude from the bad guy. And that's what I really liked about it. And of course, there's the whole bit we were talking about before we were rolling, when John Belushi's freaking out because Delta House has been shut down. They're taking everything out. And then they take out the bar, the whole fucking bar.
Yeah, this probably is anti-woke about alcoholism too. Like, I think that maybe Mr. Blutarski has a little bit of a drinking problem.
Oh yeah, and then of course they give him the Jack Daniels,
and
which
he
is ice.
Guzzles it down like it's a quart of water after a race or something,
and he's like better. He's like a heroin addict.
Yeah,
They take the shot. They're like, because before they take it, they're like all twitchy. Then they take the shot. It's like, whew, I can breathe again. And that's kind of the joke. Like, he's an alcoholic. He shouldn't be drinking, yet, everyone's kind of adding to this. But of course, things work out for him in the end. The character, that was the funniest joke, and they saved it in the end, is the character who you think is going to be pumping gas or like dead in the end turns out to be a senator. Yeah.
The highest of them all. In fact, I always thought back then they weren't sequel crazy like they are today. Everything gets a sequel, especially, I think this movie was made for like $3 million, and I think its original United States take was something like 140 million. But there was a very obvious sequel that they could have done here, and that is Senator Blutarski goes to Washington, just like Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and he would be fighting corruption, albeit from a different level of the upstart and stuff like that. But they didn't do that, and maybe they would have a little bit later if Belushi had lived. But I think it's interesting too that they go out of their way in this, and I'm not quite sure how well they conceived it in this, or if it was just ad-libbing. But in casting Belushi, they cast him because they knew he was kind of a wild comedian. They want somebody who could bring that to it. But he was also a big breakout star of Saturday Night Live by year 3 of it, which I think he made this in between 3 and 4. But it's funny because in almost every instance, he is totally counter to any norms. I mean, he's walking down the stairs to join the party in his toga, and there sits Stephen Bishop singing this sort of troubadour folk song, which is very popular in the music industry in the 60s. I gave my love a cherry, and it just doesn't sit well with Bluto. So he picks up the guitar and smashes it against the wall, but then goes, sorry, as he hands him back.
And the great thing about that scene is that we all want to do that to that guy at that party. I've been to those parties.
And he's trying to get laid probably with that song,
Yeah, well, that's what pisses him off.
Exactly. It's like he's going to charm one of those girls right out of her jumper into his bed. But, or, he's just sitting around. The party is lagging now. It's kind of breaking up, and he dumps mustard on himself. Or,
for no reason.
He puts the pencils in his nose as they're being scolded in front of Dean Wormer in his office. He's looking for just distraction or a sort of way to say screw you or flip you the bird in a way. He's the guy who coughs blowjob during the thing and gets the crowd all sort of reacting and saying the same thing. So he really is this incredible counterculture machine, but you laugh at him because I think he represented the young generation that after Vietnam, after Watergate, after recessions, started to not believe in anything. I have to tell you, when I've worked with younger people in the business that I'm in of advertising, and even just my relatives and people like that who are a couple of generations behind mine, they're very cynical and rightfully so. They have grown up without really a lot of beliefs in the system, or heroes that weren't sort of flawed or the sort of taken down because they were too good, or only the good die young. for all the outrage that a lot of people have today over what's going on in politics and sort of the world and things, there are a lot of people out there who like, Jesus, it's been going on for 60 years in this country, and what's different about it? And I don't participate or want to know any of it because it's all awful. And, there's a certain amount of justification in that. I'm not sure that helps solve anything, but a character like Bluto was very reflective of, the time which, even though he's supposed to represent sort of the last idealism in the 60s, there was still enough that he could probably have felt that way about. But certainly by 1978, after the young generation, my generation, had gone through Watergate and Vietnam and recession and, seen what, happened in the cities and like New York. We forget that New York in like 1976 and 77 was unlivable. It had to be, they wanted to bail it out, and it was trying to turn around and all this. So, the plight of the ghettos and just crime and other things and different places. And then, flyover states that were completely immune or not even touched by a lot of the contemporary issues that were happening in America writ large. It's no wonder that people sort of tuned out.
Yeah, I think you made an amazing point with Bluto, because he really is. He was like a figure that everyone kind of, as the picture in this episode shows, he kind of became a meme, where he's the college meme, but he's also the person who wants to antagonize the system. He wants to piss off the people who oppress him, but at the same time, he doesn't want to just piss them off. He wants to piss everyone off because he feels like the whole world has let him down, maybe. Like, not his character, but it's reflective of how people felt at the time. It's either you go to Vietnam or you go to college and you succeed. And now with this generation, he's kind of relatable in that way, because we have a lot of young people who are graduating college who can't find stable jobs, or they can't find jobs that pay them a livable wage, or they live in apartments and they never have the hope of ever getting a home. And it's like, you got a guy like Bluto who would probably put a big mothball in their mouth and spit it out at the assholes who did that to them. So it's like we kind of levitate towards him.
Yeah, and in fact, it's kind of fitting that he becomes a senator, because he maybe would realize, as he would mature some, that he was going to go to Washington to shake up the system and try to fix it, just like Martin Luther King, just like people like the Robert Kennedy in the time period as well, or modern people today, whether it's AOC or David Hogg and people like that, who are trying to do some different things and have a youthful edge to it, definitely. And they're definitely fighting for the average Joe and Jane citizen, and sort of the common person who is always being oppressed by a Dean Wormer or an Elon Musk or corporate America or the billionaire class, and they always have. I mean, it's so funny when we think about even the history of America, and we celebrate it, and there's many wonderful things about it, and yet it is a country that was founded on escaping religious persecution, but then we kept women as property and blacks as property as well, and women didn't get to vote until the 1850s, I guess it was, or whatever. I can't remember exactly when that decade was, but they were still fighting. Blacks were still fighting for civil rights in the 60s, 50s and 60s. Not much had changed in 100 years, even though the Civil War supposedly abolished slavery. And we've always gone through cheap labor to build these cities and these this country up for the billionaire class, and have always used slave labor, whether it was African Americans brought over, or the Chinese, or the immigrants who came over, or even children during the Industrial Revolution. So, there's a lot of reasons to be sort of counter to those in charge. And here it's written very sort of specifically with this fraternity taking on the establishment of the university, represented by Dean Wormer, and the rich ruling class of the city that it's contained in, run by a mafiosa.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's great that they put it through the lens of a college, because when you're a kid, you feel like, what, I'm not going to do what the whole world tells me to do. Right. I'm going to go on and do my own thing and carve my path. And then a lot of us, we either get older and we do those things. We do make a huge bang, or we just kind of get a regular job like everyone else. And it's really, and of course, this movie does take place, like literally the parade takes place on November 21st, 1963, the day before Kennedy was assassinated.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really kind of saying like, this was America's youth. And of course, the day he was killed, it was all taken away. He was kind of dragged away and abducted, or our innocence was abducted, kind of like how Bluto sort of abducts that girl, but they hook up anyway.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's not entirely rapey or
yeah,
kidnappy.
yeah,
I mean, it's a little bit there, which is not ideal, of course. But to your very point, it's funny
yeah.
too, because when you think about the Kennedy assassination, and a lot of people, including Clint Hill, the famous Secret Service man who jumped on the back of the limousine to try to protect Mrs. Kennedy from possibly getting shot if the shooter was still going to be aiming towards the limo. He said that in many respects, he thinks it is true that America sort of lost its innocence on that November 22nd. And yet it's interesting because right away, the majority of American people did not buy the government's official explanation of it. They knew it was bullshit. They knew they were being lied to, and there was a cover-up. And that has gone through, whether it's Vietnam or Watergate or trickle-down theories and different policies throughout the world. And we backed up this dictator and propped up this guy, whether it's Noriega and these people. And then, suddenly we've got so much moralism and that, and yet, we also were backing bad regimes and, trading arms for hostages in Nicaragua, as Reagan was guilty of doing. Even today, the even MAGA crowd doesn't necessarily buy into Trump's bullshit explanations about Epstein. And of course, they can't say what's exactly going on there, but everybody kind of knows it, that they probably don't have to say it. But I think it's interesting that there's always been a smarter people, even though we oftentimes discredit them and say, how could they vote this way? Why did they do this? Why don't they care about this? There are always those pockets, and very significant ones, that do, and it's on display in Animal House. It was on display when the Warren Commission report came out, and literally 70% of Americans thought it was bullshit. And through people's protests and student protest, ending the Vietnam War, and driving Nixon out of office for both the crime and the cover-up, and to the upstart reporters from the Washington Post, showing all the establishment journalism people how to do it. I love the fact that this is about that. And in some respects, Mike, I think that's more important, where it does stand as kind of a classic and has stood the test of time, as those themes have always been present through history, and God love it for it. And God love the youth and some of those upstarts who continue to challenge authority and flip the bird at them.
Yeah. It's a movie where a lot of people like it, but they don't know, their brain isn't coming to the front and telling them why they like it.
Right.
But it's like they kind of know, that reminds me of something,
Right.
and that's what good comedy does. It makes you dig a little deeper and not just go, boo, you got kicked in the nuts. It's like we're not living in we are living in idiocracy, but luckily we don't have.
But we have South Park, which is saying, "Hey, press, you're not doing your job and calling this shit out enough. We're going to do it for you, and not mince words about it, and be very bold and get all this kind of shared experience on social media. We can use it too. It's like the Wicked Witch said, I can cause accidents too. Fight fire with fire." Back it up, push it up, put it up, show some balls here. They showed it in this movie, in the story, as well as the release. I mean, in 1978, for this movie to come out and have such appeal to the youth, and yet it's R-rated. It does go there. It has this edge to it. But I mean, are we going to be talking about Bridesmaids in 20 years? Like, Melissa McCarthy poops in a sink, and she's basically one big walking fuck me vagina in it, because she wants that guy on the plane to have sex with her. Yes and yes, but that's what's funny about it. It wouldn't be funny if everything was nice, discreet, and put in a little box. I mean, even Voltaire and some of the witty stuff that they did in movies like Ridicule would show how the right quip at a party can give you social standing and sort of put you at the top of the standings list for the next 2 or 3 parties. It's still acidic, and there's still edge to it, even in its context, which maybe we don't think is today. But I think that we have to give a pretty wide berth to comedy to play. I don't think you want to do just vicious, mean-spirited stuff. Like I think Brett Gutfield is as base as a kick to the nuts. I don't think there's any nuance to his kind of humor by and large. But things like this, where there clearly is a lot of smarts working, and the reason for being counterculture to this is there. That's always been part of comedy. It's going back to the chorus and the fool commenting on things in Shakespeare plays, to the Greek chorus, to side characters, to the Nance, who was always commenting on things in British Hall comedy and vaudeville, as well as, the supporting players or funny characters that you had all through comedy, whoever they are, from sitcoms to mainstay movies and plays, and now with TikTok and stuff. There's always going to be something to laugh at and somebody who will probably be offended. I would argue that if you're not offending somebody, perhaps the comedy isn't cutting deep enough.
Yeah, I'd say comedy isn't working because you have to not be afraid to be booed on stage, or to be, because the thing is, if the point of comedy is we look at the taboo things in society, we look at the things that we're afraid to talk about, and we say, hey, we all know this, and it's funny that we know this, but we don't talk about it. So let's have some fun with it, and that can apply. And it also helps with horrible, terrible things in life. Like when I've had relatives who died, I would make jokes like, oh, that's my dead grandfather, I'll shoot him out of a cannon or something like that. Like, it's a horrible joke, but it's fun. But it helped me.
People, it also helps. You're right. It helps people deal with it, and it's kind of a natural counter. There's always sort of gallows humor, as it were, and I think you can live two sort of ideologies next to each other, juxtaposed, without necessarily being hypocritical. I mean, people who believe in God and Jesus and Christianity can also laugh when George Carlin makes fun of the Ten Commandments and says that, there's only really two that are laws. The rest are kind of, we'd like you to do this. And he's kind of true about it. There was also, as Christopher Hitchens said in his book, God is Not Great, which is actually, I think, in some respects, very spiritual, because he's criticizing the politics of religion and saying that the Ten Commandments was written clearly by religious leaders who wanted to secure property. So many of them are about property. There's nothing about kids in there other than honoring your father and mother. There's nothing about adultery. There's nothing about protecting the land. There's nothing about protecting animals. It's all about, do this and listen to the authorities and honor the Sabbath, or honor your father and mother, and don't covet your neighbor's life and valuables. It's all about, hey, be respectful of people who are in power and have money and are telling you what to do. And whether it's Christopher Hitchens or George Carlin making fun of it, or Animal House making fun of whatever it's making fun of, I think there's plenty of room for that without it being blasphemous or the work of the devil or horrible or we can't accept this. And even to some degree in some world, there's room for a Greg Gutfield. I don't find it particularly funny. I don't think he really is setting up humor with the nuance that he could if he was really trying to be a serious comic. And I think his sort of minimalization of just being successful on Fox demonstrates that. He's never gone out and had tours or HBO specials and things like that most comedians get, and even comedians on talk shows and stuff. But, there's room for him too. If he's making fun of stuff that I don't think is particularly funny, somebody does, and he's got the right to do that without us saying, oh, we shouldn't we should cancel him, that we can't have this. I think that there's too much cancel culture. Some of it needs to be adjusted. I think in corporate policies and different things like that, yes, you need to adjust these. You can't get away with Ari Gold yelling at his assistant the way he did in Entourage anymore. That kind of stuff is utterly unacceptable. But a comedian or a South Park or an Animal House telling off-color jokes or things that may smack of a certain amount of sexism or racism in the period, in the context, in the essence of comedy, I think they have to be given some license.
Yeah, and there's a couple things that you touched on that I think the movie does, where we see the hypocrisy of people who claim to be morally right. You have the dean who wants peace and respectability on the campus, yet he sends men off to die. While in the Delta House, when they are trying to accept new students. When Flounder pops up on the screen, everyone goes, "Oh, boo, no!" But then one of the characters, I can't remember his name because they all look the same, but he says, "No, no, 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 no. We used to be like this guy. Let's bring him in. Let's accept him."
That
Like
was
they're showing love and
Stratton.
yeah, Stratton. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're showing
yeah.
love and acceptance.
Otter, as
Well,
his
yeah,
nickname is, yes,
yeah,
because like it was like we were all losers back then, and then they throw
yeah,
this stuff at him. But he's right. He's like when they were freshmen, they were probably sitting in that same position where they were not cool enough for school, and yet
yeah,
they belonged in Delta House. But no, you're right, because I mean, Otter, who's kind of a male gigolo almost here, where
yeah.
he's sleeping with everybody and he's obsessed with sex and can't buy a vegetable without comparing it to his penis. Is a randy
Yeah.
sort, and handsome, and enjoys his sexuality. But at least he's honest about it. Versus Greg, who is supposedly Mr. Straight Lace and propriety and all that, and he's getting a hand job at the outdoor,
Oh yeah.
movie by his girlfriend, but of course she's doing it too, but she's a good girl, so she's wearing a plastic glove, so she really doesn't have to touch the flesh of his member, which is so funny that
That would hurt.
those are
I hope that was well
people
lubricated. Anyways,
to sort of accept that they're being a little more moral than the Eric Strattons of the world when they really aren't.
yeah, exactly. It's always the people who think that they're doing the morally right thing who are doing the most horrible thing. It's
Right.
like you have all these MAGA guys who are like, I believe in God, and I'm like, really? Do you? Because
Right.
the guy you pray to, or not the guy you pray to, although they do pray to Trump, but like the guy you look up to, he is hurting people, marginalizing people, locking them up, killing them. If he could start a war, he could. If he lets a pandemic break
Not
out,
giving
he
them
will
due
let it.
process, which is
Yeah,
a unalienable right of the Constitution. And as much as he's bragging and flagging and holding and hugging the flag,
yeah,
those core tenets are being abused. But here it's the same thing.
yeah,
I mean, Greg is all this, about, following the rules and being
yeah.
good and being straight and narrow. And yet, he's doing these terrible things. Even when he sits down, he's choking the stuffed animal because he's so filled with rage. He's a walking contradiction in everything he does.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the main thing. And that's the main thing. Is like these guys are viewed as anarchists and party animals, but guess what? They're actually probably the most morally centered people because they know who they are. They wear their hearts on their sleeves and they show it to everyone. And yeah, it would be nice for more people to be more real instead of worrying about getting canceled all the time.
Right. They're who they are, and they're upfront about it, and
Yeah,
they don't try to hide it. And that's maybe gross or crass, depending
yeah.
on who's judging, but it at least is honest.
Yeah, and honesty, the truth will set you free.
Yes.
And with that said, I'm going to give our ratings for the
Oh,
movie.
yes.
So for Animal House, I can probably guess your rating, but Jeff, how many Guinnesses?
I would have to give it 4 kegers myself.
All right.
Definitely the Guinness, if not the kegger that they would be having at a toga party.
Yeah, I should have brought some beer with. I mean, I have this empty White Claw. But
That's hilarious.
yeah, but that's it. I got a thing of water over there, although I can say it's vodka. But no, I'm gonna give this movie. Yeah, I want to give it 3.5. It's really close to 3.5 because Ramis's writing, Landis's direction, like just spot on. And it's like one of those few movies where I don't mind that it doesn't have much of a plot throughout most of it because it does a great job structurally of getting there. And I guess originally the movie was going to be like 2 hours, 30 minutes or something crazy like that. And
Yeah,
thank
it
God
moves
they cut
fast
it.
and never
Yeah.
wears out its welcome. Mike, I'm going to give you one
Yeah.
last thought, a compliment to somebody
Yeah.
associated with this film that maybe influences you to give it another half star.
Okay.
But again, I got to compliment the filmmakers here for making this smarter and more intellectual, dare I say, than they have to. The composer here is Elmer Bernstein, who
Yes, I
was
wanted to
very
mention that.
famous for doing scores
Dramatic
like
scores.
The Ten Commandments and The Great Escape, and
Mhm.
of course, maybe one of the greatest and most hummable themes of all time, How the West Was Won. Bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-da-da-dum. And they heard him here, and he's not doing a goofy, kind of
Mhm.
comedic, or quite the opposite. It's almost sounds like it's all Americana. It could be Aaron Copland, is that bum, 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 bum.
It
Boom,
sounds
boom.
like an actual theme you would hear
Like
in a
he was
college.
singing
Yeah.
something like in some sort of serious,
Yeah.
inspiring college story. And the fact that they put that here with this, where this main statue has a motto that says education is good. It's just that basic, but he gives it this orchestral score that counters the sort of cravenness of it is also a beautiful counterpoint. So I love that about this as well.
Yeah, because it plays the music kind of like in a serious sort of galvanizing way,
Right.
but it's not too serious and it's not too
Right.
goofy. Because a lot of comedies, back then, like if you see like National Lampoon's Vacation, it's very it's very click track.
They're trying to make it very sitcom-y, or hey, this is a comedy, so we want the score to just cue you in right away that it's being funny, even if there's nothing funny going on screen. But it was all the funnier because Elmer Bernstein was applying with such pomp and circumstance that it seems all the more wonderful, because the stuff we're seeing is funny, and yet the score is telling us this is serious and aspirational, and it just plays.
Yeah, and I think the studio didn't originally want him. They're like, "Why are you getting Elmer Bernstein
by somebody of that caliber?"
Yeah,
but he accepted it because he thought it was a clever idea, and he said he needed the work. He was getting a little bit older, and there weren't as many movies, and he was doing some TV, and suddenly they came along with this, and then he did Ghostbusters too, because these guys had an appreciation for those great old composers.
Wow, I wonder if he also did Caddyshack and all those other. Or
I think Caddyshack was mostly, top 40 hits and some of those kind of things that they started to do. But
in fairness, I've only seen it once, and I was really drunk when I saw it, so I don't remember. I do remember the poop in the pool. I remember that, but and Bill Murray just being a straight up slob, just like living in a garage and like spitting in his own home. But
that was one of those things too, where like all these imitators, a lot of them sort of dwelled on more of the slob versus the kind of intellectual rigor behind the sort of straw man of the slobbery.
Well, that was kind of reflective of the times, because like when you see cinema,
or the front man, maybe.
Yeah, like cinema, like during like the 30s or the 60s, like they were usually about people who were doing pretty well and highfalutin. And then I think towards the 70s, it kind of became more about the everyday man, because the audience could relate to that. And that movie sort of followed that trajectory. But okay, you convinced me. I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 4. If you want to know a little secret about me, it's very easy to change my mind. I'm very persuadable. So, but yes, I mean, the jokes don't age well, but again, they're not mean-spirited. They're not like, and look, there's going to be people, we know some critics who are going to be like, how dare you like that movie? Which,
so Mike, for the final exam here, the final of your exam during this show, your grade point is 3.5.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's cool. Well, my grade point average in college was pretty good, but yeah, it was an art school, so
very good.
As long as you could spell your name,
nothing wrong with that. That's all good.
I know, but yeah, it's funny. Yeah, but what was your experience like seeing that movie? Like, because you saw it with a live audience, right?
Yeah, I saw it when I was senior in high school, and it was very funny. I mean, I think it reflected some of what, obviously, like I said, we were sort of experienced with, like, how are we reacting to what we just went through with Vietnam and Watergate? And, it's so funny because we were coming off the bicentennial too. So there was a sense of this jingoistic America, and we were cresting into, I think, the conservatism of the Reagan era. But at the same time, kids wanted to hang out, have their own say, have a chance at making their own way in life. And that's true of any younger generation. And yet there were things we were definitely up against. And I think a questioning of moral authority. And if we truly believed in our parents' generation, even if we liked our parents, I think there was a questioning of whether that was working anymore. The sense of America might is right throughout the world, and some of the international things were going. I mean, this is right on the crest of the Iran hostage crisis, which, was certainly not a good look for the new regime in Iran, but it was also, because America had propped up this terrible dictator in the the leader before that for many, many decades. So yeah, it played well. It was very funny. It was edgy. I mean, these kind of things where they were pushing it a little bit more. And then their 70s was doing that already on sitcoms. We had All in the Family and The Jeffersons and MASH and, Taxi WKRP. Even Mary Tyler Moore was a modern woman who was not married, and she was a career person. And, we were making fun of the news and sort of that institution there. So, the 70s was already funny. And then the films were very serious in the 60s and 70s, very edgy. And some of the comedies were too. But I think this was, sort of doing this wonderful thing where, to your point, it was kind of lowering a little bit to the common man, and also in sort of those lower hanging fruit for gags and stuff. And yet combining that with the, sophistication and sort of the intellectualism, which was an interesting counterpoint.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think I've said all I could say about Animal House.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, Mike. This is so fun.
Yeah, I would love to just find out what it was like to just sit in that, because I know they said, like, when they saw the test crowd with the film, like, everyone got so rowdy, they were like tearing out the chairs and stuff like that.
Oh, really? That's funny.
Yeah, so it's like, man, I would have loved.
Well, I mean, like with Young Frankenstein and this one and American, the different comedies. I mean, you're right into the, the airplanes and the Naked Guns. So I think people were wanting to laugh more and kind of coming into comedies knowing that there was going to be a lot of laughs, almost kind of nonstop in a way.
It's kind of like Star Wars when it came out, because everyone was reeling from the Vietnam War.
I was there, and then that came out too. Yeah. That was fascinating. The kids got that one before most adults did, I grant you that, because it was aimed at kids. They didn't do much publicity on it. 20th Century Fox notoriously did not show any interest in keeping the toy rights, so they gave them all away to George Lucas, and that's how he made his billions and started THX and the special effects studio and everything else he's done.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen THX 1138, but I love that movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah.
So is American Graffiti. I mean, George Lucas, he's kind of a bigger picture, I think, kind of world creator as a producer now, and all these characters and everything else. But there was a time when he was just a really terrific, solid screenwriter and director too.
Maybe not so much a screenwriter, because there is a rumor that Coppola wrote A New Hope for him, or which wasn't called A New Hope at the time. It's called Star Wars. Right. But that would make sense, because, like, they say in all behind the scenes things, George Lucas is like, I'm not a good writer. And Coppola says, I'm sure you are, right? Gives him the script. Coppola looks at it and goes, oh boy, you're right. You aren't a good writer, and we can see that through the prequels. But I wish George Lucas's career didn't just go to Star Wars. I wish he gave the prequels to someone else, and he would have made more experimental.
That was my problem when we were showing the preview of Avatar a couple of weeks ago. It looks fantastic. I mean, there's so much money on the screen, and the special effects are wonderful. I'm not sure if they're that much different or better than the very first Avatar. Though you can, tell some nuances in how the clarity and the 4D and some of those kind of things are there. But James Cameron is a pretty good filmmaker. I mean, I think, with Aliens and the Terminator, and then even, what he did with Terminator 2 and the first Avatar, it seems like he's spending the rest of his career just sort of building on the Avatar sort of franchise as his legacy. But I don't think it's going to be as big a legacy as Star Wars and some of those other Bond and some of those franchises have been. And he's a talented enough filmmaker that I wish he would have done something else. He still can. I think he seems to be very spry when I've seen him interviewed and stuff. But I don't know how many more Avatar films he has, but it seems a waste of talent to constantly be doing those. He could produce them, but I wish he'd write and direct something else.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's there's like 1,000 of them. Do what Danny Boyle's doing with the 28 Years Later trilogy. Make the first one, give it to someone to make the second one, and then we'll see what happens with the third one. But anyways, I am rambling on and on and on about other stuff. If you want to check out Jeff York's stuff, the links to all of his stuff and his socials are in the description below. You can check him out at theestablishingshot.org. He does some really great illustrations of various movie characters and other people. I don't know. I want to say I got to do a Photoshop of Jeff drawing Kate Winslet in Titanic. I got to do that.
Hey, you could commission me for that, Mike. Come on. I tell you what, if you pay me to do Kate Winslet, I will draw you for free.
Okay.
that for all your
You're
publicity.
gonna take all my clothes off now.
Well, you're like one of Jack's French girls, but I will draw you. But if you want me to draw Kate Winslet.
Yeah. Just make it bigger when you draw it. Anyways, thank you, Jeff, for coming on. And of course, you guys liked all the stuff you saw here. Go to ypareviews.com and of course, SoundCloud and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm trying not to say iTunes. I'm old. It's at YPA Reviews. And on TikTok, you can find little cool clips of us at YPA Reviews Chicago. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. And go have a toga party.